This past weekend, about 30 or 40 of us got together to celebrate the development environmental farm agenda and our farm environmental agenda. Very successful meeting. And it was the 25th anniversary of the coming together of some minds to put that together. And that then moved on to become our Environmental Farm Plan of Ontario, which then went on to become the Environmental Farm Plan across the country. So we have made a lot of changes have occurred with society, and one of the questions that a number of farm leaders have been asking is, what is it? What's the next step? This has lived for 25 years. It's been modified, but society is changing. I would like to introduce the Deputy Minister of Agriculture for the province of Ontario, Deb Stark.
I was asked to talk a little bit about the government's perspective of sustainability, and I thought a little bit about how to do that. And I thought, well, why don't I just reflect the conversations that ministers and deputies have been having? And last fall, I believe it was, the federal, provincial, territorial deputies had a presentation from Dr. Mary Shellman, who's the director of the agribusiness program at Harvard Business School. She said sustainability has moved from being a fashion or a trend to a staple. And that's part of any successful business. And the real discussion is how you measure it and how you define sustainability, not whether or not it's important and what we need to do to go forward. She argued that the measures of sustainability are evolving. It's always been about economics. That's kind of a platform piece. It used to be mostly about energy, waste, and water. We moved on, added elements like animal welfare and labor practices, and now talking about things like carbon, biodiversity, and community impacts. She also suggested that the definition of sustainability is very much influenced by your local environment. And it means something very different if you're in a part of the world that just struggles to feed itself versus a place like us where we have the luxury of having incredible choice and being able to afford to pay for that choice. There's a book that I go to quite often. It's called The Primes by Chris McGough. And he says that to create extraordinary outcomes, you need extraordinary conversations. 25 years ago, the leaders of your sector had an extraordinary conversation, and the Environmental Farm Plan was created. I hope you're going to do the same today, and I thank you very much for coming to take part in it.
So with that, I think Deb gave an excellent segue to Crystal.
Farm and Food Care, as most of you are our members or supporters or longtime participants in our work, a coalition approach, so taking the leadership from Ag Care and OFAC, of which many of our founding members and some individuals that actually helped create those two groups started back in '88. About 2011, we started spending a lot more time with the public and said, you know what, they don't know the difference between a soybean, a color bean, and a dairy cow, so they just want to know where their food comes from. So that very sage advice about beginning with the end in mind, and the fact that if you go to the OMAF website and the list is 28 pages long of farm groups, that's very complicated to the average person. They're like, I have questions about my food. So we said, beginning with the end in mind, we need a coalition approach, and with the focus evolving from our original ag awareness, ag education, let's give them more facts until they come around our way of thinking, to more of a let's have a conversation about where food comes from, which also includes admitting where there's room for improvement. Well, there's many options that happen when the public trust or social license or threat to brands in terms of the food companies come into place. First of all, you can have government pressure with a regulatory or policy approach. Brand pressure and supply chain demands. A company in a day can say, we're dropping you as a supplier, and that's happened with many undercover videos. Or they can start putting demands on things like third-party audits and specific farm practices. And, going back to that farmer study, your members, the people we love, they're frustrated with this topic. They feel beat up. We're working hard, more regulations, more public criticism. What's next? More binders? God, not another binder. They're a little bit frustrated on this topic. But then I see the public side of the equation when we do events like Breakfast on the Farm and some of the positive efforts, and I've never seen more love for farmers in the province. So how do we bridge that gap and change the conversation to say we are doing things responsibly, we've got the data to prove it, and we're going to actually cheerlead it, maybe with fireworks and face painting and clowns if we can afford it. So for this morning, I encourage you to, just as Deb says, ask those tough questions, make this your own, And if you really want to drive change, you've got to get out of the back of the truck. Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to introduce Cher Mereweather. Cher, I really got to know, I've known her for years, but in the last 6 months when we've been working, and I would emphasize, they came to us and said, we want to source, we are being asked to source sustainably. We want to work with you. And I'm going to turn it over to Cher to explain what they're looking for and how we're working together.
So who is Provision Coalition? We actually formed in 2009, and interestingly enough, we came together because we wanted to simulate the Ontario Farm Environmental Coalition. We saw that there was a real issue at the processing side. There was a common problem around environmental regulation, it wasn't sustainability at that time, but many of the industry associations identified that they had a problem. They didn't have industry expertise to deal with it, but if they came together as a group, they really could do more. In 2012, they asked me to join the organization, and we did a really intensive strategy session and said, you know what? This is more than environmental regulation and environmental management. This is about sustainability, and we need to make sure that this organization can do something. The primary focus on sustainability knowledge transfer to Canadian food and beverage manufacturers is what Provision is about. And we really see the opportunity for collaboration is to focus on the harmonization of efforts and the consistency of information requests across the supply chain. Just like farmers are being asked for audits and information about what you're doing, our manufacturers are getting that same pressure. So we understand. We want to work together to figure out how we can do this effectively in one program. This is about supply chain collaboration and pre-competitive sharing. And that we really and truly believe that strong collaboration across the supply chain is the key to success, and that we need to work together despite the complexity.
But one of the things we had to do was look at all the programs and look at some of the major programs that exist here in the province or in Canada and what they're about, where they're going. Harold, I'm going to bring you up.
So how do we harmonize as we move forward? It is complex, but I think we have to pay attention to those initiatives that are already out of the gate, that are already proving success. The Canadian roundtables that are in place, SAI already have initiatives underway around the world. The Roundtable for Responsible Soybeans already out of the gate in Ontario, and looking at again some of the other initiatives. But when it comes to alignment and harmonization, we already have a lot of programs and components in place that probably, if they're required, have already been inspected, certified, verified by some other group, and national codes of practice for livestock and poultry already negotiated. That may be simply a one line on a sustainability plan that is checked off and maybe referenced as to in terms of who was responsible. The financial analysis is important for producers, but I think unfortunately it's not necessarily on the radar of the non-farming public, and we may want to spend more time and effort making sure they understand the complexities of running a farm operation. Again, in Ontario, we have our nutrient management plans, source water protection. Those programs are already established, and we want to harmonize and minimize any duplication that we possibly can. I've been a strong proponent of having a staged implementation. If we start with a common framework under voluntary programs like the Environmental Farm Plan, I would think the content within EFP could very easily be adjusted to come up with perhaps a new look, a new format, a new framework that better aligns with the other types of components that are now being talked about in terms of verification and metrics, land use efficiency, soil erosion, energy, carbon, water use and quality, and of course social responsibility. We don't currently have the Environmental Farm Plan structured like that, And I guess I would suggest, and this may be an area to be shot down, but we need to have the farmer recognize a common look right from their initial voluntary enrollment that may go no farther than either attending a workshop or going online to do their own self-assessment. Where it's important for the value chain, perhaps a commodity group might lead verification, might lead a sample verification to show how their particular commodity is doing in terms of a sustainable farm and food system. And of course, we already have examples of third-party verification already out of the gate.